Some people are maybe experimenting in slightly different ways with a combination of drugs that are both stimulant and consciousness expanding, and that leads you to make fucking wacky decisions that only prog musicians are going to get.
You're still listening. This is our final transmission.
Here we are. Are you here, Jamie?
I'm here, Sam.
It's Final Transmission.
It certainly is. How's it going?
It's going great, man. I could not be happier right now. What about you?
I'm feeling pretty okay.
Yeah?
We've got a good chat ahead of us. We're going to talk about The Burning from 1982.
The Burning. Oh boy, do I have some things to say about this film. What about you? You a fan?
Well, let's find out, shall we?
Let's.
Come on, man. Does that thing even work? No. There's nothing out there. It's just dead air.
Hey, Sam, guess what?
What, Jamie?
Final Transmission, this podcast right here, is brought to you by Red Scare Industries.
The greatest punk rock label of all time.
They've got a lot going for them, haven't they? Celebrating 20 years in 2024.
20 big years, 20 big turnips. What do you like about Red Scare?
One of my favourite records ever is actually on Red Scare, and that is Masked Intruder's self-titled record.
That's a big, big shout. A huge sack of turnips right there.
It's a real record.
It is a real record. And did big things. Huge band, great band, mysterious band.
Grab it before someone shoplifts it.
Fuck yeah.
And with that, let's get on with the chat, shall we?
Let's get back to it.
We should maybe synopsisize.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that, and I thought it is really simple to synopsisize in a lot of ways. So why don't you run her down for us?
Well, okay, so interior.
You could do the whole screenplay.
A summer camp. Basically, a bunch of kids play a prank on their camp caretaker.
Yeah.
And it goes kind of wrong, and they set him on fire, and that's the burning of the title. And then sometime later, I can't remember if it gives you an indication of how much time has passed. Presumably, it's 5 to 7 years because of reasons that we'll get onto later. This is a great synopsis, isn't it?
You're killing it, buddy.
So basically, prank goes wrong, guy gets burned, summer camp, comes back at some fixed point in the future and enacts
It is 5 years, by the way. We gets out of hospital after 5 years, yeah.
Right. I couldn't quite remember if it was nailed on like that, but it must be.
They do that great voiceover where you see them wheeling him out of the hospital, and the doctors are all saying things like, the skin graft just didn't take. You've been here 5 years. It's time to leave. You know, all that kind of stuff. So
he gets out 5 years later, and he or someone enacts their revenge upon a bunch of kids at a camp. Is it him, or is it a weird other kid who isn't that weird? He's just sort of pretty normal, although he did look at people in the showers at one time.
Yeah, he really did. And we'll get to that.
We will get to that.
That's a great synopsis, and I think it does have that interesting division where it gives you an awful lot of stuff before the credits, which I really like. I don't know about you. I mean, that's a thing that's maybe coming back a little bit. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there is a bit of that. I think modern slashers tend to focus very heavily on the slasher, on the killer themselves, and there isn't an awful lot of space for the victims or for the people who are slashies.
The slashed.
So that's the big delineation between like these sort of classic slashers or even slashers up until Scream, and it all gets a bit weird after Scream because I think people took the wrong messages from the big tentpole 80s slashers and Scream, and they think, okay, cool, we got Jason, we got Michael, we got Freddy, we got Ghostface. This is the thing that people remember, so let's make it about them. So one of the films that's on our list is Hatchet. I don't know if you've seen Hatchet yet.
I haven't seen it, but I've seen the cover and I'm excited.
I mean, it's great. It sort of sits on that fence quite nicely between a bit of both. Whereas, yeah, the beauty here is that you spend quite a long time with those campers waiting to be slashed. I think maybe if the film's guilty of anything, and it's guilty of quite a lot of things, but if the film's guilty of anything, it's a bit too much. There's a bit too much space there.
You think so?
Yeah, I don't think the characters are really strong enough to warrant that kind of, or that amount of getting to know you time.
That's really interesting, because one of my biggest notes is that I find the characters in this kind of head and shoulders more believable, more relatable, and in many cases more likable than in a lot of slashers that I've seen of that era. And what I also found really interesting is that while I immediately believe a lot of what's happening with them in their relationships and things they do, and I'll maybe talk about some specifics later, what I really love is that you don't actually find out anything about them. It's all personality based. It's all intuitive. So it's like, I like him because she is attractive to me because she did this, he did that. But there's no backstory for any of them except maybe one. And I found that really interesting. They didn't try and, narrative wise, no one's shoehorning in some reason for him to be that way. It's just take him on his, his behavior, first impression type thing.
I guess that's a good shout. Like, you do sort of get dropped in with those people, and it's not like, oh, remember when we all came here on day one and we're all friends and we all formed relationships based on mutual respect. It's just like, hey, you're just here.
I like that it's messy because it's more real. There's no like super hardcore established friendships. It's all very bendy and everyone kind of hangs out with everyone. And I found that really believable, especially in the dynamic of camp counselors at a summer camp. A lot of it's friendships out of circumstance, so people behave weird, and sometimes those like strange reactions to each other's behavior just felt really lived in from the very beginning. I thought it was cool.
I wonder if one of the things that you're feeling there as well is because so much of the cast is really recognizable, and that's not generally a thing in these old slashers, besides maybe Johnny Depp and the fact that we spent 5 movies or whatever with Heather Langenkamp, and I guess Paul Rudd. And okay, I'm just listing off loads of names. It doesn't. I guess my point is moot. But I guess these are people that you don't really associate with horror. They're sort of quite highbrow people that are involved. You've got Brian Backer. You've got George Costanza. What's his actual name? I've forgotten in this exact moment.
Oh, Jason Alexander.
You've got Holly Hunter. Like, you've got these people that are like big names now, but not like Paul Rudd big names. Not Busta Rhymes big names.
Best Busta Rhymes. Nobody went on to have like a super established Hollywood career that maybe runs up until now with any kind of relevance, except you could say Jason Alexander, but not knowing enough about his career beyond George Costanza, I see him as kind of a one-trick pony.
Well, so I think the crop that came out of this movie, like your Brian Backers, your Jason Alexanders, your Holly Hunters, they're more like indie. Jason Alexander does a lot of theatre, a lot of musical theatre, so it's all sort of quite highbrow. And Holly Hunter, I mean, obviously she's in these sort of massive populist shows, but there's a bit of like indie cred that goes along with that. I mean, I wonder if that sort of is because they got on the Miramax train quite early, and obviously Miramax became a bit of an indie factory. I wonder if that's kind of the inciting incident there for the way that we perceive these people.
It definitely seems to set a trajectory. I mean, the thing that I loved, the second I started watching this movie, one of the first people that I saw that I recognized was Brian Backer, and really the only things I'd seen him in was very small bit parts, except Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is released the very next year. So he looks almost exactly the same. It almost feels like, he is Mark Ratner in a different situation in this movie. Like, what would happen if Mark Ratner went to a summer camp and nobody liked him? And I absolutely love just the second he pops on screen. I think he owns every second he's in this movie. I really, really love his performance. He is a really difficult character to get a handle on in terms of like whether you side with him or whether you absolutely hate him or whether you're somewhere in the middle. Talking in specifics later, but he does a lot of stuff in this movie that I think is really challenging. I haven't seen someone do that kind of like immediately caught red-handed shame in such a great, difficult to watch, squirmy, horrible, uncomfortable way. He does a lot really, really well in this movie, and I love it. And yeah, the second I saw Jason Alexander, it's one of those like, what? What is this fucking guy doing in this movie?
He's so weird in it as well, because he's so like, it's so alien to see him be this complete opposite role to George Costanza. It's just very weird. It's unfathomable.
I mean, does that speak to his like depth as an actor, that in this he is I mean, for all intents and purposes, very confident, a real showman. He's very outgoing. He's kind of bullish. And then obviously we get the neurotic mess of George Costanza. Is that breadth?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know, because I've not seen an awful lot of, besides Shallow Hal, other things where he's playing on the George Costanza persona.
Yeah,
I don't see an awful lot of things where he's not doing that.
Sure.
But I will say, when I was 15, 16, 17, I was the most confident person in the world, and now I'm in my 30s. Let's leave it at that. I'm a very different person with a very different outlook and all kinds of neuroses and anxieties.
So he kind of aged into that role a bit, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what happened there, or if maybe he's just a good actor.
It's hard to acknowledge that he's a good actor, but
especially after watching The Burning, it's fucking awful. Yeah. Like, he's great, but he's awful.
I think he's fucking great in this. You see him, and straight away he's standing there. You know, everyone's playing softball or whatever it is. You know, he's got that other. Who's the guy that sucks? Eddie has got his arm around him in that classic, like, all-American kind of crossed arm across the chest kind of thing. And they're talking about girls, and he's got a full head of hair, and he's not like built, but he's not like a saggy middle-aged dude at this point. He is quite attractive, I think. Like, he's got quite sharp features, and he looks very switched on, and super confident from the beginning. And there's a lot that he does in this movie. I mean, more so than I think Brian Backer's character. He does more likable stuff.
Yeah.
He is has a bit more gravity to him. But he also, you know, he does some shitty stuff too, and he's really convincing about it. I think it's another really good performance from those guys.
Yeah, I think he really sort of highlights what you were saying before as well, about how, like, the friendships are quite fluid, because he, as like the broker of the group or whatever, he sort of weaves between those friendship circles, or between the bullies and the bullied and the other people who are just sort of there.
Yeah,
he's like that conduit, really, that ligature that keeps those people together.
Dude, yeah, he's the kind of guy, he's a bit of a social chameleon. Like, everyone knows one, do you know what I mean? He's not a jock, but he's wearing that football sweater. He's the guy who can get stuff, but he's not like a sleazy criminal guy. He's just cruising on pure charisma, I think, the whole way through, and I find that pretty endearing, but still jarring, you know, as a performance. I think when you've got someone who built an entire career out of one role and spent years and years and years doing that one person, you really do see them as that for a long time. And obviously people's careers kind of get ended because of that, but a fucking wonderful way to see him in a movie, I think.
Yeah.
I loved every second that he was on screen. This is obviously Fisher Stevens.
I love Fisher Stevens.
His movie debut. Tell me about it. What did you think?
I think tiny little twink Fisher Stevens is something that I've just really enjoyed seeing. I love Fisher Stevens ever since I was a kid, and I thought it was okay to talk like that in Short Circuit. Obviously, it's not okay. We've all learned a valuable lesson from the 80s that it's not okay to dress up a slightly tanned white actor in brown face and have them say those things. But I love Fisher Stevens. I think he's great.
He did that after this.
He did do that after this. The Plague in Hackers, absolute. I think my favourite non-horror villain in the movie.
Right.
I love him. I love Fisher Stevens. I've had very strong feelings for Fisher Stevens for a long time. So seeing him in that sort of weird Paul from the Wonder Years role is just an absolute joy.
There is a parallel there, definitely.
Yeah. And watching him get his face chopped off with a pair of shears was an absolute joy to behold.
Pretty good fun. He did that well. And I think he's another one who, I mean, apparently, based on what I've read about him over the years, he had a rough start in Hollywood. I mean, no surprises. He doesn't fit at all, anything, ever. He's definitely a character actor, I think, but one with a bit of scope. Yeah, seeing him as a gawky teenager, impossible to place his age in this. I didn't want to look it up to ruin it, really, but I think he might genuinely be about 15. Do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
And seeing him with like a shitty complexion and just like not an ounce of fat on him, like clothes hanging off his body.
Yeah, that weird like bowl haircut.
Yeah, like an uneven. Everything's uneven. Like he's wonky and he's janky and he doesn't walk in a straight line at all. He's all over the show. And he was just like visually arresting from the start, obviously. Like his look is so pronounced. You never forget him once you've seen him. Again, he just effortless, total confidence the whole way through this movie. Like he doesn't second guess a single moment of his role. I don't think it just comes across like he is that guy. He is Woodstock.
Yeah, well, I think if The Burning does anything right, it's that the performances are generally really good.
Yeah.
Do you think he's called Woodstock because he looks like Woodstock from Peanuts?
I was thinking that because he has almost the exact same like head shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be.
I wonder if the character existed on the page called Woodstock, or they got Fisher Stevens in and were like, he looks like Woodstock from Peanuts.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me if that's one of those like off the cuff things where maybe in real life people called him Woodstock because of how he looked and they translated it into the movie maybe.
Yeah.
We'll look that up. We'll do a fact check on that.
He's not a long-haired stoner guy.
No, exactly.
Which is the only other reason you would call someone Woodstock in an 80s slasher movie.
Yeah. What year are we in for The Burning? Is it 1981?
It was made in 1981. And we should probably address one of the other elephants in the room. This is 1981, so it's a year after Friday the 13th. It's a very similar premise.
Yep.
Or location. It's a slasher. There's a revenge element in there. It's better than Friday the 13th.
Wow, crikey!
I mean, it's
tell me more.
It's just as nasty, similarly as nasty. It's plot wise, it's very similar, beat for beat. I think The Burning does some more interesting things, and I think the performances are better. I love the first person stuff. I love the stuff that takes place out of the summer camp, the stuff in the hospital, the stuff with...
I knew you'd love that.
This doctor, right? He's like, oh, you want to be a doctor? That's my impression of that one guy. Like the guy who wants to be a doctor. Is he like had a late stage career change? He's like 50.
He's like 50. I got that in my notes, and he's shitting bricks about looking at a burn patient. It's his first day on the ward.
I mean, he should have been shitting bricks because that was quite a scary little moment. But
that was horrific.
But yeah, I love that. I love the stuff with the character that is named Hooker in the credits.
A great name, a great performance.
Yeah, I don't know an awful lot of sex workers, but can't imagine they are that chatty when they've just picked up a job on the street. Just narrating their entire...
And now I'm going up the stairs. You going to come with me? Yeah, it's that's maybe, I mean, deliberately on the nose, clearly, and very tongue-in-cheek. But maybe one of the only parts where I was like, it's going to go here as a slasher movie. I wasn't thinking it was going to take that turn and go really like hammy. That was the only bit, and it works for the scene, I think. Yeah,
it sort of lulls you into a bit of a false sense of security.
It tricks you.
Yeah, you think, this is going to be a fun film where fun things happen. That situation goes down differently if she's like, oh, hey, sorry, I didn't realize you were so burned. I'm not really comfortable with this. Maybe we could just snuggle. Or
yeah, for sure, she could have handled it better, and that's why she was viciously murdered.
You look at someone who is disfigured in a way that you maybe don't find too appealing, and you go, "Oh my God, like."
That's exactly what she does. Well done.
Maybe just move the scissors to a different part of the room.
Definitely don't have them right there. But also, do we think Cropsey was actually going in there to have sex with that prostitute, or do we think that was his first victim? He was always going to kill her.
I mean,
did she see the murderous intent, or did she freak out over the burns? Because he was being weird.
It's his first physical contact besides the orderly for 5 years, presumably.
It is also the first place he goes when he gets out of hospital. He goes straight to that super seedy red light area.
Where are you going? 5 years.
Red light area. And then straight to the summer camp. Nice, good itinerary.
He's getting it either way, isn't he? Like,
I think it's fucking fascinating that you think that you like this more than Friday the 13th and that it's better than Friday the 13th, because I've been grappling with that in my head, and the way I don't
think I like it more. I just think I think it's better.
You think it's better? But then again, I think to myself, if I had a good sized budget and a good cast, and I just seen Friday the 13th, and I got the green light to make a slasher, it would probably be better than Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Not to take anything away from, how this movie was made and when. There are cloned scenes in this movie that I cannot believe nobody took legal action over. Cloned, shot for shot. Like, phenomenal. The campfire scene. They tell the campfire story, and the Joker guy jumps out with the mask on and scares everyone, and then they all go about their business. It's exactly the same. I mean, that's happened in movies before, I know, but...
I have a real issue with the campfire scene. It's one of I don't know how many elephants there are in this room, but it's one of the
pretty crowded.
It's one of one of the biggest issues that I have with the movie.
Come on then, why is that?
I mean, okay, let's get into some spoilers here because we've been talking for a while.
Yeah.
Your main guy, what's it called? Todd.
I've got him down as lead counselor. He's not, because he's under the main the boss guy, but he's
he's the counselor who is the lead. He was involved in this in the burning, but he just tells the story like it's a myth.
Oh, is it him? Is it him telling the story? Is it? Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, good point.
And it doesn't make any sense. He's like, oh, this guy was real mean. You wouldn't want to cross him on a dark night. And it's like, I mean, you crossed him on a dark night. You literally burned him. You are
to death.
Like, literally.
You are the burning. That's interesting. I hadn't picked that up, and that is tonally really jarring when put next to his reaction at the end when he's frozen in terror at the sight of the man he burned.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That should have been chopped out completely, if you ask me. It doesn't add anything. It's cloning a movie that I think does it a little bit better, and I didn't think it brought much. But I'm such a fuck. This is the problem, Jamie. This is why we need we need you to speak up on those things, because I just drank it in. I was like, ooh, campfire scene, spooky. I just went with it completely. I was just looking at everyone's like enraptured faces as he told the story, and I just got really into it. But that's a great point.
I think what you're saying about it being cloned as well from F-13, it's like, it's quite interesting because with 40 years of distance between those films and having a world of other films that exist on the periphery of that, it doesn't bother me that it's the identical scene. But
yeah,
imagine if you're a cinema goer, horror fanatic in the early 80s.
Yeah,
you've got maybe 6 to 8 films that you can watch a year in the cinema, and it's like, oh, this is the exact same shit.
That's almost unforgivable, I think, from like a paying audience point of view. Like, it's fine for us with unlimited, infinite content and ways to watch it, and a lot of it for free. But yeah, I think if you'd come out the previous summer and seen that exact scene, and you're a bit of a horror junkie, and you go and you see the exact scene played out again before you without even the slightest creative twist on it, I'm just amazed no one got sued.
The creative twist is that it doesn't make sense in the narrative of the movie.
Good point. Yeah, the creative twist is done really badly. It's all wrong. Yeah, I think that's pretty great. I mean, there's some awesome dialogue in this movie. One of the things that I really love about it is the dialogue. I think so much of it works. There's no, well, I say there's no, there might be, but I don't see any horrible, clunky slasher dialogue or anything that's really, super cheesy or tired or played out. And from the very beginning, I think the dialogue's great. The opening scene where the guys are playing the prank, one of the guys says, "Tonight's the night. Cropsy's going to get what he deserves." And it just sets the scene really nicely.
And you don't think that's cheesy slasher dialogue?
Well, this is the thing. The way it's set, the way I just said it makes it sound like complete dog shit. But the way they do it in the movie, it actually kind of works.
I think that's the difference between the actors that Sean Cunningham and co cast for Friday the 13th and the actors that they cast here.
Yeah.
For no good reason at all, this movie has a bunch of prestige behind it. And it might be the fact that the performances in this movie are good, the fact that they found good performances for a movie called The Burning that came out in 1981, which is basically a retread of Friday the 13th, just really speaks volumes to why this is maybe something that we're talking about.
I agree. And I think, the fact that it's, Jason Alexander, Fisher Stevens, and maybe a couple of others' movie debuts makes it all the more surprising that they're such rounded performers. Like, they absolutely nail it down. I don't know how much Brian Becker had done before this. I know he did some stuff as a kid, but he is this fucking guy. He just is.
Yeah.
What is he, Alfred? He just is that guy.
Yeah. Even a half-formed Holly Hunter or a half-formed Jason Alexander or a half-formed Brian Becker, they're still those people. They still have that in them. So like a slightly shitter version of something that's great is still pretty good.
For sure.
Whereas like a lot of the other slashers that were made around this time were, this had a bit of budget behind it. It was a low-budget slasher in terms of the grand scheme of like the Hollywood machine, but it had a decent amount of money behind it, I think.
Yeah.
Things are pretty pressed behind the scenes, so you see that in some of the special effects.
Yeah.
But there's some big, good horror names also associated with this. You've got Tom Savini, doing some of my favorite of his makeup work or his effects work, but also some of my least favorite at the same time.
Is Savini in the room with you? Blink twice if you're under duress right now. I know he's not your favorite dude, but in terms of the visual effects, I think there's a lot of stuff done really well. One of my favorite facts about the production of the movie is that there was no costume department. All of the actors wore their own clothes.
Well, I read that on IMDb when I was looking recently.
Yeah.
But in the final credits, it says clothing supplied by the Gap.
Wow. That's interesting.
So maybe there was no costume designer, but maybe someone somewhere was like, he'd wear that, which is basically what a costume designer does. Not that I know fucking anything. I literally have very limited experience of being in movies.
Specifically in clothing design.
But maybe they had the trust in the actors to say, what would your character wear?
Yeah, they probably had a gap in, like, you know, it says in the credits, doesn't it, Western New York, very ambiguous. Like, maybe they just had $60 each and they all got to go to Gap. If that's the case, I think the award for best costume has to go to either Woodstock or Jason Alexander for that big, thick, fluffy white sweater. Completely inappropriate clothing for a campfire. Like this big, like, gatefold. The whole movie has a really cold feeling to it, don't you think?
Yeah.
Summer camp my ass is fucking cold as balls in this place.
Have you ever been to a summer camp?
Yeah. Well, kind of. Not like the American style where you're away for a whole summer, but definitely went camping a lot as a younger guy and as a kid, and well, as an adult as well, but, you know, in the context of this movie, definitely like camping out as a kid, yeah.
Yeah, I went camping a few times, and we had like a day thing that you would go to in summer holidays when I was a kid, but it was like, you just go for the day.
Yeah.
But you go every day, but it was for the day. But you'd come home at night and have your tea.
I mean, the idea of a quintessential...
Get smacked around by your parents. But...
Exactly. And then you'd go to camp and get smacked around by the counsellors and they'd let you drown while they fucked in a bush.
Get bullied and someone slam your hand in the big door and then you have to get your nail amputated.
Oh my God.
These are just universal experiences, Sam, that everybody has.
Everyone's been there. The idea... I think I'm drawn to these summer camp movies because to me... and maybe to a lot of English people, I don't know, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but this demented idea that these kids go away and are entrusted into the care of a bunch of fuckwit, horny, drug addict teenagers for a whole summer blows my mind. Can you imagine being in a bunkhouse with a bunch of psycho kids for the best fucking part of the year? Like, it scares the shit out of me in principle, let alone, like, as a movie premise.
I think I went to something that was summer camp adjacent when I was a kid. I'm just thinking... like, we went away with cubs.
Yeah, I did a scouts thing before I got kicked out. I did it was wild camping essentially. We didn't do campsites. It was sketchy as fuck. But yeah, we did a bunch of that.
Yeah, we had like bunk rooms and stuff, and there was a guide. So maybe it was a school thing. Yeah, it must have been a school thing because Alex Finlay. Are we allowed to say people's names on the internet?
It's going to be really fun to blank it out.
Alex Finlay, who dropped off the face of the earth as soon as he left my high school. I hope he hasn't committed suicide. He was sat next to me and we were playing roadkill bingo, which isn't a thing in the UK because there's not that much roadkill, but we thought it was funny at the time.
Right.
But he was from my school and he wasn't in my Cubs or my Scouts or anything, so it must have been a school thing. But there was like other schools, and so there was girls that didn't know how much of a fucking loser you were. It was great.
That's a big opportunity.
Yeah.
How did you blow it? Tell us the story of how you blew it.
I capitalised on it for a short period of time, and then ultimately my personality persevered.
It's the thing, the personality always comes out, as we find with Brian Backer's character Alfred in the movie The Burning, in which early on in the movie he takes it upon himself to watch a girl shower in one of the most awkward movie shower scenes I've ever seen. Did you notice anything about this shower scene that made it fucked?
Oh, go on, enlighten me, Sam.
It's a very long shower scene to begin with. My take on it is that it's meant to be leery. You're supposed to feel a bit uncomfortable because it pans in on Sally's face while she gets into this like sketchy outdoor, you can see the sky type shower. She's showering, you see the whole process of her washing her hair. You're already in there for an uncomfortable amount of time, really close. And then it does this thing where it pans slowly down and backwards, slowly revealing her naked body. And then it stops for a huge amount of time on her breasts. And then it pans slowly forwards again and up to her face, which just feels, as a camera movement, really fucking invasive and creepy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like, if you put like boom over the top of it, it would be porny. But you've just got the creepy sound of the water and creaking trees and the knowledge that someone's watching. So it's really fucking effectively creepy. Yeah. Did you feel that, or was it just a tit shot?
I mean, it definitely wasn't a tit shot. I think it definitely was a tit shot, but it definitely wasn't just a tit shot. I think your description of it there was much more arousing to me than watching the film. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I don't know if I actually quantified that or recognized that that's what the film was maybe trying to achieve in that moment.
It felt almost like dizzying, like the moving forward and backward. It felt overtly sexual. It felt like slow leering. It was creepy as balls. And then obviously you find out it does the build up. You think it's maybe Cropsy's going to get her in the shower, and it's not. It's Brian Backer creeping on her, and he is, summarily roughed up and taken out by some of the boys and shouted at by the girls and given a bit of a dressing down, but then ultimately completely forgiven and pumped back into the camp like nothing happened.
What are they going to do? Just like drown him? Like, there's not an awful lot.
Well, they threatened to send him home, and they don't do it.
It's because he has that touching moment with Todd, who was also a bit of a nerd back in the day or something.
And I think that was really important to see Todd take pity on someone completely pitiful, who you immediately don't like for being such a pervy, weird guy. So there's an immediate bond there, and I think that slightly complicated relationship is exactly what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, fuck, who do I side with here? This guy's condoning him perving on one of his colleagues, I guess, in the shower. The girl's really upset. Todd's girlfriend, Michelle, who we haven't talked about yet, I think is fucking amazing in this film. She's probably my favourite performance in terms of her consistency from start to finish. But she's furious. She wants him out. So who do you side with? Like the pervy Mark Ratner, or the pretty level-headed, even-keel, reliable Todd? It's a really tricky one. Really early on, it puts you in a place where you feel like you've got to pick a side, and I really like that. Pick a side among the quote-unquote good guys as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that this film does here is that it recognises that watching someone in the shower is a bad thing.
Yeah, which I was pleasantly surprised by, to be honest.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to be Porky's, because when they're pranking the guy at the start, there's a Porky's vibe.
Yeah,
it's almost like it felt quite playful and fun-loving, and then obviously it gets rapidly out of hand, and you have this awesome burning scene. But immediately I was like, tonally, is this going to be excusing a lot of sex pest behavior from start to finish? And it doesn't. I don't think at any point it does, which was really refreshing given the staff.
Yeah, apart from the film itself being generally quite pervy.
Essentially, yeah.
I think
and probably a vehicle for abusing lots of people, knowing Harvey Weinstein.
Obviously, you mentioned Harvey Weinstein there. What do you think about the life of this film and the legacy of The Burning?
Well, as far as I can tell, I'll go on record as saying I think I love this film.
Yeah.
I really, really, really like it a lot. And the fact that I'm watching it at age 37, having had no previous experience, I didn't watch it when I was 15 and then, grow up with it or whatever. I watched it for the first time as an adult, and I found essentially nothing I didn't really enjoy about the movie. So it holds up for me as a viewer at this point in time. I think in terms of, we have to watch these movies through a certain lens, knowing what we know about Harvey Weinstein and about Hollywood in general, the machine. But in the sense that it doesn't feel dated to me. It doesn't feel hammy. It had a real chance of leaning too much into a hammy kind of thing. There's a few references in there that I think unless you watch a lot of movies you might miss. Like Jason Alexander does a curly, does a Three Stooges, certainly at one point.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of stuff never ages well at all. But if you're in any way familiar with that kind of thing, it just kind of, goes by. I think there's nothing here that leaps out at me as being poorly done for the time. There's a moment when Cropsy is on fire, the titular burning, if you will, and it, to me, on my big OLED TV, it looks like a guy in a beekeeping outfit on a bit of fire who then falls into water. But I watched a couple of clips on YouTube of proper grainy old VHS, and it looks fucking spectacular. You can't see the shape of his fire suit or anything like that. So it totally holds up in that sense. In terms of the performances, I think they've aged really, really well. There's some lines that are a bit sketchy, and there's a couple of moments that, maybe you would have to kind of cringe at now. But overall, I think it's aged really well. I think it's pretty fucking durable. What about you?
I completely agree. I think there's a reason that this is, it's considered a classic by a lot of people, but it's also considered to be an underappreciated classic by maybe the mainstream of horror fandom. There's very little wrong with it. And what is wrong with it is completely forgivable.
Yeah.
Apart from the Weinstein connection.
Yeah.
Which is a real rough go.
That's a big one, yeah.
And there's accusations that he on his first film, The Burning, he was already sketchy.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, and it sucks to praise something that obviously came from somebody so shitty. But I tried, this might be a character flaw, but I tried not to let that bum me out as a first-time viewer. Otherwise, what the fuck would you watch ever? What would you do? And it's one of those things, I don't have a lot of experience with that particular dynamic because I'm not a fucking Michael Jackson fan. Do you know what I mean? I've never had to have that rug whipped out from under me as a fan of something, really. Like, I don't like David Bowie. I don't like any of these people who turned out to be, pretty horrific in a lot of ways. So
you were a massive Lost Prophets fan, though, weren't you?
I can't even pretend. So yeah, it definitely, I don't like feeling like I'm endorsing the work of a fucking sex criminal. Do you know what I mean? But that being said, I really fucking like this story, and that guy came up with this story. So for better or for worse, we have a movie that came from the mind of a pretty demented sex criminal, and it kind of shows.
I want to interrupt you there a little bit, because I think the idea that the story came from his mind, like, he didn't write it, he's credited as story.
Yeah.
And the story is there's a summer camp and some people are there and they get killed.
If that's the loosey goosey, if that's what he said, he walked into the fucking pitch room and was like, there's a summer camp and some kids get killed. And then he got the budget. I don't know why he's Richard Nixon. He is in my head. I've never heard him speak, so to me he's Richard Nixon. Then yeah, absolutely.
I am not a sex criminal.
Yeah.
I mean, he is.
He is. He definitely said he wasn't. He fucking is.
Will you give it up, man? Nobody's out there. We're alone. Oh no, there's somebody out there. I'm picking up all this crosstalk.
The two things that I wanted to talk about in terms of durability: Rick Wakeman's soundtrack.
Amazing.
I really fucking like it. I think it's way more durable now that we've had a lot more medieval influenced synth in popular culture. I think that's made it easier for a lot of people to swallow. There's really nothing that I don't like about this score.
What is it about prog bands and their members that make really good horror scores? Like, what's the correlation, do you think, between, okay, I am a massive synth nerd, and also I like watching people with their boobs out get stabbed in the face?
I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think part of it has to be, to a certain extent, in some cases, budgetary. I think these guys are cheap at this time. They're obviously good musicians, but they're not pop musicians. So there's the fact that they're affordable. Rick Wakeman may or may not be a massive horror fan. I honestly don't actually know. But
I mean, if you look at him, you would go,
probably think,
you saw him on the street, walking down the street with like crumbs all over his t-shirt, eating a massive bag of some sort of maize snack.
Yep.
You'd be like, that guy likes horror films.
He likes The Burning specifically.
Yeah. He likes to be in the shower.
He really does. Yeah, he's not hiding it behind nuanced camera work. He just likes being in that shower.
Although my image of Rick Wakeman is the sort of mid to late 90s, long hair, beard, kind of a bit older. Whereas here, I think he was probably quite svelte and quite rugged in a sort of sexy mountain man kind of way.
Probably, yeah. And I think he thought outside the box and was pretty adventurous with his composing for this, because I honestly don't think it does what most people would expect it to do. It's like Golden Axe. It sounds like the music from Golden Axe. He's like, there's these triumphant little lifts when people are doing things that suck. Like there's a bit where I keep wanting to say Mark Ratner. Sorry, Brian Backer, Alfred, is watching. It's when he's watching Glazer and Sally getting it on for the first time, and he's got his hands against a tree spread apart, and he's got one leg really far back and one leg really far forward in this weird, almost like mime-like pose. It's very stage, and the music is like Ash at the end of Army of Darkness. It's like a huge triumphant lift. Like, check him out, he's perving on this couple. Like, it's a bizarre placement, but it really fucking works because it makes you so uncomfortable, and it tells you that someone's about to die. So there's loads of clever little lifts. There's lots of really ominous, deep, dark beats. There's lots of really shrill, buzzing synth in there at the right places, at the right times. But you're right, like bands like Goblin and, these proggy dudes were probably cheap, but also probably lent that way. They're not people from the mainstream. They're not products of, a straight-laced musical education who had a career path in front of them. They're probably all weirdos who hung out in the same bars. Yeah,
no, I think that's probably it. I think nobody gets into prog for the chicks, right? It's like...
Apart from Rick Wakeman. Not being like the world's biggest Rick Wakeman fan, if I'm totally honest. Like, I really like a lot of his movie work, but this to me was immediately arresting. It immediately made me want to look up who did it. and I think it serves the movie front to back, and it doesn't feel dated because I think we have this renewed appreciation of synthscape sounds in movies now, which is getting tired, I think, in a lot of areas. But this is obviously an original. This is going way back, and I think it does a great job of underscoring a lot of very uncomfortable, tense moments really well.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that's becoming a bit rote now, a bit tired, is, and it breaks my heart, but it's the John Carpenter style. Yeah, I think people recognize that, like, A, a man on his keyboard is really cheap, and B, it really just fucking works. So people are just absolutely aping that very specific John Carpenter style.
Yeah,
and it sort of hurts a little bit. But then, like, you got films like Drive, where they really sort of like lent on that sort of type of weird sort of spacey synth as well. So
a great reinvention of a kind of classic sound in that movie, I think. But you're right, a lot of people just rip it straight off, and it kind of sucks. Yeah. The thing that I'm guilty of is actually kind of enjoying it as well. Like, sometimes I obviously love and respect John Carpenter and everything he's ever done, but if someone's going to rip him off cheap, I kind of enjoy it sometimes. It's why we like bands that rip off the Ramones.
Okay, so let's talk about the violence in the film. How do you feel that the violence worked and for you?
For me, I guess partly, I think it's one of the weaker elements of the horror of the movie, mainly because I don't think the violence isn't really the culmination of a lot of the feelings in the movie that really keep me in it. So I think the violence is great in a vacuum. I think the visual effects are awesome. There's some really good kills. I think Glazer's death is probably one of my favorite slasher deaths ever. There's spoilers obviously, but Cropsey kills him by jamming the shears into his throat and picking him up and sticking him against a tree, which sounds super simple and a bit Friday the 13th-y and very straightforward. But there's this fucking amazing POV shot from Cropsey when he's got the shears in there of like a tracking shot of him going towards the tree that is fucking visionary. It's great. And a great performance from Glazer as he dies. It's a superb death. And it feels hyper-violent. Fisher Stevens getting his fingers cut off with the shears, it seems to be pretty iconic. I don't know, maybe you can tell me a bit more about that, but people seem to love that scene in particular.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty iconic. I think one of the things about the violence that really works for me, but then also is a bit of a challenge and a bit of a hurdle to get over, is the fact that basically all the murders are all committed with the same weapon.
True.
Which is not something that you see an awful lot of, because even in your Friday the 13th, obviously there's a big machete, but there's also
a huge range of weapons. Yeah, maybe it's more of a Michael Myers type nod.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, even Michael Myers, I think there's some.
Oh, he mixed it up later on. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess that's the problem with looking at things from 4 years of history, is that it all sort of merges into one.
I think the thing about the weapon being shears is that it obviously plays in heavily with that. The most iconic moment in the movie is Cropsey standing up out of the canoe with the shears above his head pointing downwards, which I think looks incredible. That's such an arresting image. Other weapons probably wouldn't work like that, but you're right. I think he doesn't mix it up much. He kills the hooker with the scissors, and he is not killed by shears. But yeah, I think you're right. That is an interesting choice to have him. And there's no real explanation for the shears, right?
I mean, he's a caretaker at a summer camp, so presumably he used shears in his day-to-day, but that's not established, really, is it? I don't think. But
I mean, speaking of violence and him being a caretaker, his shack where he lives is full of gasoline.
It's a health and safety nightmare.
It's an absurd amount of gasoline and kerosene lamps and combustibles and all kinds of cleaning fluids and shit, and that's obviously why he catches fire. But the opening shot when the guy is sneaking into his shack, every shelf behind him is just red gasoline cans. It's incredible.
I mean, I don't know if that's meant to be a joke.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a little joke for people that are paying like super attention, but it's like...
Yeah, I think it might be.
Do you know, like when you do your like health and safety training at work and you have to like look at a thing and point out all the hazards? It's basically one of those, just like...
But that, in terms of the violence, my two favourite violent bits in the movie are the two things that happen to Cropsey ultimately. His first burning, I don't know who the actor is, I haven't got his name to hand, but his like facial performance while he's burning is phenomenal. He looks so genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, it's really good.
Probably because he was really on fire. And obviously,
Well, so one of my favorite things about films in the 80s, sorry to cut you off,
Go on.
is that they all involve someone being on fire.
yeah,
I think they just perfected like the putting someone in a suit and covering them in fire technology. So they were like, let's just put this in every movie.
we got to make a movie based on this.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, someone's going to run through a window and they're going to be on fire, and we're going to do that in every film for maybe 6 to 7 years until someone's like, hey, maybe we should put someone not on fire for a minute.
Maybe just extinguish one guy.
Yeah.
But they really do it well in this, I think. And one of the funniest things I saw in terms of like anecdotal shit from Tom Savini about this movie was that when they did that initial scene, the plan was very straightforward. They were going to set the stunt guy on fire and send him out through the door and do the scene. But Tom Savini had he was lighting him with a lamp. Not even with like I don't know, I assumed they'd have something for that on a movie set, do you know what I mean? Like a special kind of long match or something, but no, he just has a fucking lamp. And they'd put rubber cement all over the inside of the place so it would catch fire properly. And he slipped on a piece of rubber cement and set the guy on fire while falling and set the cabin on fire at the same time. And someone had to like drag him out the back so they could get the shot of the guy coming through the door. So the whole thing was a total clusterfuck. And he looks at the camera and he says, "Never trust Savini," which I think is a pretty good way to look at it. But yeah, that scene in particular and Cropsy's death, my two favorite violent moments in the movie, I think.
Again, I really like the entire hatch. What's the word? Raft.
Yeah.
Different part of Lost. So I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the entire raft scene is just carnage for several minutes, and it goes on too long in a way that is great.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my god, people are still dying, and then the moment where the raft sort of drifts back to the bank where the people are, I just think, oh, it's great.
It's chilling. It's really fucking chill. You know, it's full of dead bodies, and they're like, "Hey, here they come!" Like it's really well done, and I love the callback when they're first paddling out to that canoe. It takes forever.
Yeah,
it's so agonizing how long it takes them to get to that fucking canoe, and then everyone dies. And the callback when what's her name, Michelle is paddling out to the raft is exactly the same. That tension of like paddling out there forever, and you know, Jason Alexander's making jokes in the background, and you know, either she's going to die or she's going to find all her friends butchered on a raft, drifting in the middle of this misty river. It's great.
Yeah, I think the thing with the canoe that really works is that you don't know if Cropsy's going to be in there or if it's going to be the corpse of whoever died before. Is it Karen or whoever?
Yeah, Karen's still missing at this point, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, they're going to find Karen's body and then be sort of marooned in this sort of terror boat with a corpse. But no, it's Cropsy and he fucks shit up. It's great.
Yeah, it's real. And the first thing she does is grab that severed arm. I think it's Fisher Stevens' severed arm. And then his face drifts by. So yeah, great. In terms of like visual violence, that's awesome. There's nothing I don't like in terms of the violence in the movie. It just wasn't my favorite part of the movie, which I think speaks to you know, why I love it so much, because I'm not like the world's biggest like super hyper violent movie fan. I like a little bit more going on than that. So there was so much it did better, but I still really fucking enjoyed watching these guys get chopped to shit.
Do you think one of the reasons that The Burning really works is that it's kind of based on an existing piece of social myth?
Yeah, potentially. I was definitely thinking that while I was watching it, in that, you know, we have certain expectations with things that are mythic, don't we? We expect a certain trajectory. But I also love how it plays with that a bit, because there's no real like hero's journey type thing here. There's like pervy kids who end up being kind of heroes, and there's, you know, a redemption arc sort of for a guy who still kind of sucks. There's not an enormous amount in terms of character development, unfortunately, for some of the female characters that aren't as well written and aren't given as much screen time, except I would say for the fact that Michelle is one of the most likable, strong female characters in all of slasherdom, I think, for me. And she doesn't end up being reduced to like final girl status or anything like that. So I think they do enough with the myth to feed you, but they don't they don't overfeed you. They don't fatten you up for Christmas with it. It just works. It's quite subtly done. Again, I think that's quite masterful writing. As much as I hate to say it, I think that's a really well written set of characters doing really fucking genuine performances.
I also think, so you touched on there with the fact that Michelle doesn't end up as a final girl. I mean, this is sort of before those tropes were really established.
Sure.
But but it completely like bucks all of the existing trend, because obviously a bunch of the slashers were already out there at this point. A bunch of those really big slashers that changed the way that people experience these kinds of horror films. And this just books that trend. So it sort of sits as a bit of an island in the middle of like slasher horror films, where before things got postmodern and we were like, oh, let's subvert these tropes. It's not subverting the tropes. It just doesn't give a fuck. It's like, it just sits in its own area. I think because it came from a different perspective in terms of the writing and the creating of it. I'm very slow to say call this film art,
right?
But there's an artistic streak through it. I think in terms of being able to say this is different to what you've seen before, despite the fact that it's exactly the fucking same.
Yeah,
this is somehow different to what you've seen before, and I really rate that. I think it's beautiful as well. I think it's shot really well. I think the editing is dog dicks, but the there's that one scene, it really annoys me. It's quite near the beginning, and it's one of the female characters just sort of talking, and then it fades to black, and it's like, oh, I guess we got all the information that we need from her in that scene, so see you later.
I hate the bit at the end where they finally discover, what was her name? You said her name a minute ago, the girl that is murdered after she goes off with Eddie, and they spend loads of time looking for her. I can't remember her name.
Was it Karen?
Well, Karen, that's it, yeah. So the big reveal for her is when they're in like the mine at the end, and Todd like turns around, and there's that weird grainy still of her dead face that pops up for like 2 seconds and then goes away. It looks total fucking garbage. But you forgive that stuff because it's in the middle of one of the most tense, weird final boss fights ever. Like it's so well done in that sense. And I think I agree. Like there's the bits that I loved in terms of the cinematography are pretty much ripped directly from Friday the 13th, I think, but there is a slickness to the filmmaking here, probably budgetary as well, that just does it a little bit better and more cleanly, which I really like in this context. Normally I would kind of be saying the opposite, but there's something about it that just really works. And I think a lot of it, again, is these shots are backed up by such amazing performances that you love seeing it through their eyes. I don't really give a fuck about anyone in Friday the 13th, apart from Pamela Voorhees. I just genuinely don't connect with anyone. And I don't give a shit about their POV shots or anything because the characters kind of suck. Whereas in this, I'm like, I want to see the world through your eyes. So when we're panning in on that green, empty canoe, I'm seeing it through Woodstock's eyes. And I'm like, ooh, fuck, buddy, you're in trouble. Like, and I love that. I think that really works.
Yeah, I think the slickness here, I think it does really work because it's not Jaws. No. Although one of the things that I think really, really helps this film is that you see so little of Cropsey throughout the film. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's, again, maybe it's similar to Jaws that they had to do it because the makeup was so shitty. But like, which, you know, from what I read, Tom Savini didn't have an awful lot of time to create that makeup. But, you know, it's fine.
I did find it scary.
Yeah, in a shitter movie, you'd be like, that's exactly what I expected.
Yeah.
But, you know, in this, it's whatever. But you're right, it is pretty scary, but it's just a bit like, oh, yeah, it's a melted candle man.
He does have a fucked up face. Yeah, that's...
yeah.
It looks like, I think, ultimately, it looks like a gammon, you know, like a gammon that gets left in the garden after a party and gets kicked around on the floor. Like, it looks a bit like...
I feel like you've not been inviting me to enough parties, enough gammon in the garden parties.
Yeah, it's a Suffolk thing. We do gammon football at midnight in a dust pile. But I find it, you know, I have a slightly lower threshold for being genuinely scared by movies than you, I think. And I found his face scary, especially when it appears in the window and, you know, Albert sees it in the window. That scared the crap out of me because it just looks like a fucking baseball glove or like a wet saddle or something. It looks really fucking creepy.
Yeah, well, I think that one really works. That scene really works because there's a degree of separation as well. You've got you got the window. You've got like the shade thing, the Chrissy Crossy guy.
Yeah,
that's what that's called officially, I think.
Are you in interior design by any chance?
Don't blow my cover. Like when you see it later on, when it's like full reveal, Brody's on the boat. We're going to need a bigger pair of scissors.
Yep. Like
thing at the end. It's like, okay, you should have kept this hidden for forever.
Yeah.
killed him from
It
the
worked
back.
for me in the light of the fact that he's walking in really slowly in side profile with a flamethrower. That, when you cast the light upwards and you see his face for that brief second, I was like, oh, Jesus, that's going to be fucking so greasy when they actually show it. And then, yeah, the final shots of it that are a bit more, front lit
Yeah.
are maybe less effective and a bit more rubbery. But I love the sound of the axe hitting him in the head, and I love seeing his head with an axe in it as he fucking burns at the stake in that barn. I think that looks really scary. And the fact they picked 3 very specific angles to film him burning at the end is just ominous as fuck. And it's, in terms of the visual effects from that angle, I think the face is genuinely effective for me. I wasn't disappointed when I saw the face. And I like that the initial fear of the hooker at the start is totally justified, and he is a really horrifically mangled and maimed human being roaming around the woods.
I don't think that's justified, Sam.
You're sympathizing again. Oh no, sorry, you're not sympathizing. You're criticizing her professionalism.
It's not that. I just think if you saw a burned man on the street, you wouldn't be like, oh my God.
But mate, he looks like, when you peel a boiled egg badly and it all comes away with the shell, he looks like that but pink. It's that bad.
I mean,
he looks like a chewed pork scratching but pink.
Yeah, all right. Fuck him.
Fuck Cropsy. I mean, is there an angle here to say that if she'd been sensitive at the beginning and just given him a good time, maybe he wouldn't have actually killed anyone and he was genuinely just looking for love?
Potentially. He might have just spent 90 minutes in the afterglow and then credits.
Great movie.
Yeah. Just like slowly panning in on his burned face as he smokes a cigarette.
It's like a short version of The Elephant Man. Nailed it.
Does this film do what it set out to do? And what did it set out to do?
The second part of that question is the hardest thing for me, because contextually I think it was a cash-in. I think they wanted to make money. I think they had access to some really great early career actors that were willing to be launched and were actually being paid quite well by all accounts. So I think it was a moneymaker and a bit of a cash-in. But I think anytime you're making a horror movie, whether it's for a cash-in or not, you want to make a scary movie that unnerves people. And this touches on a lot of... in terms of the filmmaking, I think it draws influence from places that you wouldn't expect from a cash-in. The whole hooker scene at the beginning that we keep revisiting feels very Hammer horror. It feels really dirty. It feels video nasty in a way to me, in terms of like the weird production value and the weird lighting.
The film that it really reminds me of, which I think maybe a little bit after this, is Basket Case. I don't know if you've ever seen Basket Case.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It makes me feel sick in the exact same way.
Yeah. I think all the stuff where it's like, what's his name, Belial, before you see his little weird penis, like all that stuff where he's like stalking people, I think that probably owes quite a lot to The Burning, I think. Yeah.
And I think a movie that's trying to achieve that kind of horror, which is essentially slasher horror, there's nothing like paranormal or, it's a psychological horror in a way. It's obviously pulling shitloads from Hitchcock, but it's pulling it through other slasher movies, I think. We're talking about POV shots here where there's just Vaseline around the edge of the lens. Do you know what I mean? That's about as low budget as you can possibly get.
Yeah.
So it sets out to be trashy in a lot of areas. I do think they're trying to add some flair with things like the score that's amazing, with really genuine performances by young people who seem to be really getting along in real life and who are let off the leash. There's loads of ad-lib bits that you can tell are just them having fun. There's a bit where they're canoeing and they're all having that water fight, and Jason Alexander accidentally sinks the canoe next to him. Do you remember this bit? And he looks directly at the camera and shrugs when the canoe sinks, because it's obviously a complete fuck up, and they just carry on rolling. Stuff like that I just love.
Yeah, if I was a producer or a writer who's on set or anything, I feel like I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to think that I know how young people talk.
Sure.
So I would, if I had the scope within the movie making process, which we've discussed, I genuinely don't. I would say, go ahead. You're 16 to 25 years old. You're much closer to this than me. Although I don't know how old Harvey Weinstein was at this point, or any of the other writers or directors,
or members of the cast either, for that matter. We've really done our research.
That's why it's 16 to 25. Like, they could be anything.
They could be. But you're right, and I think they do that some of the time. And I think the dialogue is something that really endeared me to this movie. Some of the lines that come out are absolutely brilliant. Like I said, like One of my favorite lines is, when was the last time you won a personality contest, Glazer? I think that's great. The way they put Glazer down from start to finish is brilliant.
Yeah, and the fact that he's ostensibly the bully.
Yeah.
But, like, he's not violent with it. He's a bit threatening sometimes.
Yeah.
He's all bravado.
He doesn't actually hurt anyone. And he dies after prematurely ejaculating in the woods. Like, it's a pretty steep downhill for that guy, and a pretty shallow story. But do you think
it's because Jason Alexander got him the wrong condoms?
Exactly. He didn't have the lubricated condoms that he specifically asked for.
Yeah, so the friction was too much, which made him ejaculate early.
Exactly, and that's why he died.
We call those Chekhov's condoms.
Chekhov's.
It's established early on, comes back in the climax, literally.
And it is pivotal in someone's downfall. Yeah,
exactly.
That's perfect. I love that. I think Jason Alexander, when he's trying to convince Albert to swim, and Albert can't swim, and he just looks at him and he says, drown, and then jumps in the lake. I think that's amazing. He just looks at him and says, drown. There's so many good lines. I think the dialogue is fantastic, and it adds to... it's immediate chemistry for me from the beginning. From the very second you see them playing sports ball, whatever it is, softball or baseball at the beginning, right the way through to when they're falling apart, sobbing because everyone's dead. Totally fucking believable. If they're setting out to make like a realistic teen slasher, which I don't know if they were, if they are, I buy it from start to finish.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the performances on that sort of hyper-naturalistic side, so it's like there's like an extra level of natural beyond the normal natural, which makes it feel a little bit unnatural, but you forgive it because you know you're watching a movie.
Yeah, because they're young and hyped. It feels... I think some of these characters are huge fucking personalities, all put in this pot together. But that's another thing. Nobody really feels like they're stealing the show throughout this whole movie. There's no real central character here because you don't spend a lot of time with Cropsey, and you don't get under the skin or into the backstory of any of these characters. I don't think you even find out really that Michelle and Todd are a couple until halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
So you're not invested in many relationships. You're not really pulled one way or the other. And normally that's a death knell for me in terms of a horror movie. Normally that's the first thing I hate, is that I don't give a shit about anyone in this movie. But that is a massive strength in this, because everyone is given enough room to perform and be a really unique character without, stumbling into some horrific trope. And they all just live it. They all seem to really live the movies.
Yeah, I think, I mentioned at the beginning that I think we maybe have too much of them interacting. But I think you might have talked around on it. I think maybe that you're right about how the level of that interaction. Yeah,
I love it. I love every minute that we're with these characters, because the dialogue is so whip crack tight and realistic. And the sense of fun is what does it for me. They have so much fun together that looks real, that when they start dying, I'm really bummed. I really feel like, fuck, he's like that guy's best buddy on this whole camping trip, or he looks after him. What are they going to do without him? I really feel the loss of each character, which is pretty huge.
Any sort of major negatives that you want to pull out? I've got a scene.
What's the scene that you hate?
The fucking fake out baseball. Oh, I'm looking for my baseball in the woods.
You didn't like that?
Something scary is going to happen. Oh no, I found my baseball. It's fine. I just fucking hate that shit.
Definitely a sucky, nothingy moment for sure. There's a million ways they could have told us that Cropsey was in the woods without doing that.
It's just, there's loads of reasons why I hate it. It's he's in the wrong camp. Like what? Did he have a canoe? Like what the fuck's he doing? How did he get there? Did he walk all the way back round to the other camp? Like through the woods? They couldn't walk home when the canoes were all let free. Like, do you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, if I don't like anything, it's not that I don't like it, it's more that I am unsure of it. So the whole chase scene where Brian Backer is running through this like bouldered woodland landscape, I love that there's so many shots of him doing weird shit, like pressing his back against the boulder with his arms spread and wide-eyed looking around, because that's when it feels like an arty horror film to me. That's when it's got a touch of something auteurish, and I love seeing that. It just feels a little bit misplaced because it slows down the tension. But what I realised on the second watch is that that's Cropsey playing with him. I didn't realise, I thought it was just a crap chase. You know when you get like a lumbering killer that's always fucking 20 feet behind? There's a couple of subtle shots where you see Cropsey's feet on the boulders and stuff that's really subtle. And it totally rounds out the whole sequence for me, which is a really long sequence. That whole ending starts with him seeing Glazer killed and then running away.
Yeah.
And I love that how much of his cowardice is on show there, and it builds up to his final redemption of killing, essentially not killing, but stabbing Cropsey. So the only thing that I struggled with was that chase scene, because maybe I got a bit bored of it on first watch, but second watch I realized there's so much nuance in there, there's so much going on I missed the first time around that I actually really fucking like that. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie. If I don't like anything, it's the slight cop-out aspect of not really fully feeling the evil of Cropsey as an entity. He's just a dick janitor who is horrifically burned. I feel really bad for him at the beginning because sure, he sucks and he fucks with kids and doesn't give their ball back or whatever, but his burning is horrific. He really fucking goes through agony. And then he does come back a psycho, but I don't feel like I like Jason's backstory. Do you know what I mean? I like a bit more.
Yeah, well, I think all of those petrol cans or whatever he had in his little shack, if those were vodka bottles or whiskey bottles or something, then you add a bit of depth to that character.
Yeah, for sure.
But otherwise, he's just a guy that likes to petrol loads of lawnmowers or whatever he's using that for.
He just likes to keep a big supply of combustibles.
So the story that, again, the campfire scene, which is nonsense. Yeah. I think you're right. Take that whole scene out, because then the campfire scene at the end, the sort of bookends the film, makes more sense, because it becomes the story of the film becomes the campfire story rather than
it's different people.
Yeah,
and that is for me. And again, this is me being kind of a wuss about horror movies. That was the scariest fucking moment in the whole movie for me, is when that guy makes direct contact with you straight through the screen and does that final refrain, "You're dead." Like, he says it with so much malice, and it's really fucking a stark attack at the end of the movie that goes straight into credits. I loved how that worked. And you're right, it doesn't have to be a callback to an earlier campfire scene. Just do that in isolation and really shit people up.
I think because the Cropsey urban legend is an existing urban legend in that area, it makes sense for the film to be the thing that becomes the narrative of the urban legend in the ongoing universe of the film, which obviously ends at "You're dead." But
agreed.
I think that makes more sense than having one of the people who literally burnt Cropsey telling a story as if this man is a nebulous figure from space.
Todd I kind of grappled with a little bit. He reminds me of I'm going to forget the guy's name, but in Friday the 13th Part 4, the guy that's out hunting Jason, he's the guy that gets killed and says, "He's killing me! He's killing me!" That guy.
Todd reminds me of the Bundy's neighbor in Married with Children, whatever that fucking guy's name is.
He does a bit, yeah, you're right. He's got that look about him that's fairly forgettable, but he is obviously like a good-looking guy.
Yeah.
I actually think I was unfair on him. He does put in a good performance. There's a bit where he's sitting by the water throwing stones into the river, and he says, "I just feel real uneasy." And for some reason, it's just a really well-delivered line, and I really like him for it. But he doesn't do as well as some of the other really strong characters, I don't think. He is a bit of a train in the movie, like he just chugs on and keeps everything moving, which I really like. But I think maybe a little bit more from him would have been good. If I'm picking nits massively here, it's that his performance doesn't do everything I want it to personally.
Yeah.
But he's still great with Michelle. I think their chemistry is awesome. Even when they're tickling in the woods, do you know what I mean? That would be another thing where I'd be like, fucking, why is this in this film?
Yeah.
But they make it really real. They're tickling. You don't see them bang, which I think is nice. She just says, "I've got a better idea," and they go off screen. So I like that. I think, there's so little that I don't like about this movie. The raft scene for me, I know is a massive deal, and it's really iconic, and it is a frenzied kill scene. I really like the build up to it a lot more than the actual kills.
I think it really works because this is a slasher film that came sort of hot on the heels or like sandwiched between Friday the 13th films, which are the sort of gold standard in this sort of sleazy, violent, like sub stream of slasher films. Sort of, I think the kills, the violence is relatively sort of playful and subdued in a lot of places. The stuff with the character named Hooker at the beginning, you see the scissors go into her belly, and then you see some blood splatter across a mirror, but that's all you see. And when Karen or whoever dies at the beginning, pretty mellow, and then all of a sudden, like you're thrown into this super heavily violent, like kill rampage just in the middle.
Yeah.
It feels so alien to the way the film works. It's like so out of nowhere. Obviously, it's not completely out of nowhere. It's a horror film with a killer in it, but like, it's just you're expecting a fairly sort of like cutaway style of kill, and then all of a sudden you're just in this melee of organs and body parts just flying around and floating down a river. It's I think it just really works. I know what you mean. Like, I think the way that it really drags, they really draw out that sort of going to the canoe moment. I think there's a lot of tension there.
But those kills are so well paced for me, because earlier on when Karen dies, you get this super creepy move of Cropsey taking her clothes from the side of the lake where she's gone skinny dipping and making a trail of them out into the woods. Yeah. So she has to wander around naked, really exposed, really vulnerable, really cold, after having to fend off this dick Eddie guy who's just trying to get on her. And she ends up in the woods, partially clothed, attacked and killed. And that's a super creepy, sinister build. Yeah. And then, like you say, it all builds up to that fucking orgy of violence on the raft, which is great. And where the fuck he gets a flamethrower is maybe... Again,
like I think this is stuff that is vaguely linked to being a groundskeeper or a caretaker.
You're like, right, yeah. My dad, who is a groundskeeper, does have a flamethrower.
There you go.
That makes sense. That tracks, yeah.
I mean, I'm picturing... There's a specific shot of Groundskeeper Willie with his shirt off and a flamethrower in an episode of The Simpsons. I don't have an awful lot of experience with groundskeepers, so that's my...
Well, speaking from experience, my dad actually made his own flamethrower.
Nice.
So it's a thing with these guys.
Can of links in a lighter.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. A can of links in a lighter. It's very official. It's very fucking professional kit. Yeah, there's just so little that I dislike about this movie. It's shot and absolutely rocketed up into my top 5 slashers, I think.
Wow. Well, we'll see if we can mix that up a little bit over the next.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for, because you've put so many slashers I've never even read about, never even heard of in that list. So I think that's going to change. But yeah, I love a bit of psychological / supernatural horror. So a slasher with that in it is probably going to trump some of the stuff in here, but essentially this ticks all of my boxes as a slasher fan. I think there's so little that I would change. It all just feels like it was done for a reason. They don't feel like, if there's happy accidents, it's good, but there's no like terrible decisions, and there's nothing that feels fan servicey or genre box ticking, really, to my naive eyes. It just feels like a great, fun, really fucking ominous feeling slasher. I really like it.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we say so long to the burning?
I don't want to say so long to the burning. I love it. There's one thing I made a note of, that in the final confrontation scene where Todd freezes and Cropsey's about to kill him, and we have Brian Backer make this great grab for the shears and just plunge him through his back. There's this amazing and fucking really weird, you can tell me if you've seen this in other movies, but I've never seen it. There's this rhythmic screaming while Todd has these flashbacks of when he first burned Cropsey, and Brian Backer is screaming. He's doing this like percussive, like over and over, because he's in so much pain, and it's timed in with the flashbacks, and it's also timed in with Cropsey's movements and the way that the cuts are happening. It's really fucking rhythmic, and then it builds up to the final stab. I hadn't really seen that done in that way before.
No, I don't think I have either.
That low humming, you expect like really climactic music, and there's just this like throbbing synth in the background that's really fucking creepy.
Yeah.
And that whole scene just worked so well for me. You don't want to blink because it's so tightly cut. In terms of the editing, I think that's one scene that they do really well. They're getting a flashback in there with a current scene of Jeopardy, with a final fight. Like it works really well. And I just thought that was really tight filmmaking, really deliberately, probably really deliberately storyboarded like concept for that whole end scene.
Yeah.
And the music just made it completely. I thought it was fucking great.
I was quite shocked when I found out the director of The Burning wasn't some actual prestige director that had a shoddy start in making horror. Sort of like James Cameron's first film was the sequel to Piranha. And you can sort of see a bit of James Cameron in there. It's like, who should we get to direct the Titanic? Let's get the Piranha 2 Flying Killers guy. Yeah. He's got experience with filming underwater or whatever, although they do fly in that film, so there's not an awful lot of underwater. So I think there's a lot in terms of the cinematography and the direction about that really sort of speaks to what you might expect a director who would go on to be a prestige director, but isn't. He's just I think he just stayed in the genre. He didn't do an awful lot after that. Looking at his IMDb at the moment, he did a lot of what appears to be short documentaries about sports cars.
Really?
Yeah, there's one about Jaguar, Ferrari, Aston Martin, Porsche, Maserati.
I mean, some guys just cranked out these movies because of time and place, right? They were just like, this is what we can get some money for. This is a good chance for me to establish my name in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he goes on to have a Steve Miner career or something like that in and out of horror. It's not like a Sam Raimi or Tur piece. It's just a fucking good boilerplate slasher with a lot of clever touches, I think.
Yeah, I just think when you like specifically the scene that you're talking about towards the end or towards the big climax it has a real sort of strong European feel to it. It feels like almost like De Palma approach to like European through an American's eyes. So it's like taking some of those moments that you would find in maybe a Hitchcock or maybe a Giallo or something from Italy or from France, and then twisting it into some sort of American sensibility, and then you get something that really works like that off the back of it. So it's just weird that this guy didn't go on to have a big career in Hollywood after this.
Yeah.
I mean, he did make Split Second, which is fantastic. I don't know if you've seen that. It's
I haven't seen that.
Rutger Hauer, Kim Cattrall. Oh, it's I can't. Maybe I'll add it to the list. I don't want to go too in depth.
Keep adding.
I'm obviously going to keep adding, but yeah.
There's one line from good old Jason Alexander that cracked me up when I first watched it. Made me feel really uneasy when I thought about it, and seems completely cheesedick in retrospect. But he turns around to that table full of girls in this hall packed with children and asks the girl, he says he's going to town, can I get you girls anything? And he offers to buy them spermicide. He does like a wink and a kind of thing, and he says, can I get you girls anything? Life jacket, spermicide. And it's fucking so George Costanza.
Did they know what spermicide was?
No idea.
Because like it's not like, oh, condoms, tampons, like it's not that.
So
it's like,
nerdy.
hey, do you want some of the specific chemical that they use in condoms to make sure the sperm doesn't accidentally get inside you and get you pregnant?
It's so fucking wrong. It's such a nerdy line delivered by someone so chiseled and charismatic. Like it kicks my ass every time I see it. It needed a hard zoom in on him when he said spermicide, if you ask me. That's what I would have done.
Yeah.
Very good. I didn't realize it was a mine until quite far into that end sequence either. I thought this is a fucking weird and very cool setting for this to have gone to from a summer camp, is these weird like blank concrete walls in the woods, and then entryways that don't look like a cheesy typical mine until you see a mine cart, and then you're like, okay, this is meant to be a mine. But I liked that it felt like a maze. You see a lot of it from above. Brian Backer, who later goes on to play a character called Rat, is running around this fucking maze while Cropsey watches him from above through a greasy lens. It just fucking rips. It's really fucking cool.
So the burning, how many toes up do you give it?
Toes up, that's great. I mean, I think we're probably rating these movies obviously within the genre and with the lens that they are, essentially fun, entertaining horror movies. I'd give it 13 out of 13. It does everything I want it to as a slasher movie. It surprises me, which it really shouldn't, because it's a rip-off of another movie that I really know really well. But for everything that I've already said and some more, I think it maxes me out in the slasher genre in a really cool way.
So 13 out of 13.
Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I give it 2 severed digits up.
Nice.
I think it's aged better than a lot of the slashers of that time. I think that's why I think it might be better than Friday the 13th, because I think it's aged better. I think it's shot better. I think it looks slicker. And in the age of OLED TVs and stuff like that, I think that sort of has a bit of traction.
Yeah. I think Friday the 13th gets a lot of credit for things that maybe weren't as deliberate as people are giving it credit for. Looking back, like the whole scene where we spend like 5 minutes watching someone make a cup of tea and walk around a cabin, I think a lot of that is more filler than people give it credit for. And this movie doesn't waste any time. It doesn't linger. It doesn't labor anything. It just gets in, does the job, and gets out, which is why I credit it for doing the job so well.
I mean, I spent my entire lockdown 25 minutes every Saturday morning watching you make a cup of coffee. So
that's a fact. That is definitely something that we both willingly participated in there.
So, who are we to judge?
It's true.
Sean,
it's very true.
Sean Cunningham.
I also don't love comparing the two movies. It feels like it should be such a direct and easy thing to do, but it doesn't feel like it really gets me anywhere. And I love taking them both as the beautiful beasts that they are. And they're both for very different moods, I think. Like I wouldn't be like, oh no, which one shall I watch? I think I know exactly what mood I'm in when I want to watch one or the other, which, I think speaks to at least a strong sense of identity in one, if not the other.
Whoa, holy shit. I guess that's why they call it Phantom Power.
Jamie, we did it.
We did it, Sam. That was The Burning. How do you feel?
Oh, I feel fantastic. I love that film. I loved hanging out with you and having a chat, and I hope people love listening to it.
Me too. I'm so stoked that this podcast is finally going to be out there in the world. If you liked it, which I hope you did, there are loads of ways that you can support the show. You can subscribe to our Patreon for just £3 a month. You can get, nothing at the moment, but eventually there'll be stuff on there.
You can rate and review us on the internet in a variety of places.
Yep, TripAdvisor, Yelp.
So do that because it helps us big time in ways that we won't bore you with. Write something funny on there. If you're going to write a review, be cool. Write something hilarious.
If it's not hilarious, we'll delete it. We won't delete it. That would be awful.
I'm not even going to read it. But The Burning, it was fun. It was a good razz. We're very glad that you tuned in. Thanks for listening. Anything to add, Jamie? Anything else?
Yeah, we'll see you next time for Trick or Treat, starring Ozzy Osbourne and Gene Simmons. Starring is a dubious word there, but they're in it.
I cannot wait. Trick or treat.
See you then.
Let's go.